Hey, this is Carl, also known as Aeropath in the Custom Magic community, and today I wanted to do a quick video on Netropolis. Netropolis is up for the vote for rotating in the custom standard, and I've done videos and content related to Netropolis before, but there have been a few changes. It's a different rotation period, um, and the videos I did before weren't very in-depth for the last rotation on Netropolis anyway. I did in-depth ones on every single other set, but not as in-depth on my own. I wanted to do one for this rotation just kind of show what Netropolis has to offer to help inform the voting. And I've kind of broken it down into a few things. I want to talk about lands, what that will bring to the format, what aggro tools it's going to bring, and then just kind of going over a lot of the staples. So just kind of like eagle-eye view of the format and what general trends the set's going to bring. And then also looking at a few of the control tools that it's going to offer outside of the normal staples. Look at the sideboard tools, and then talk about the themes that Netropolis brings. There's been some, in the past, people have worried about the themes being a little too insular with artifacts and upload. It's really not the case at all anymore, at least not to the same degree. And I'm going to go over all of that and just highlight some of the cards that I think people will be excited to build with and put into their decks. But first, let's talk about lands. These are slow fetches. This was a design from Simon, who did Heirloom, that he experimented with a lot of different fetch land designs because he wanted some for another set. And he suggested a design like this for Netropolis, and it's played really, really well. This is an allied cycle that's kind of a slow cycle, right? If you are actually fetching, the lands come in tapped, but you can use them as fast lands that just don't fix if needed. And that has led in playtesting to some interesting decisions as far as how you sequence your lands that I think has been skill testing and feels good. Right now, people want more aggressive lands in the format, and these don't really fit that. But I don't think that the aggressive land issue is perhaps as bad as it's not going to be as bad as it is now. I know several, well, at least one land from Hollows is being fixed to work for aggressive decks, to be really good fixing for that. And kind of my offering for that is Coruscating Cityscape, which, you know, fixes for any color, but you have to upload a card as you play it. And that makes it kind of like a Rupture Spire design, which Simon and one other person both suggested it at the exact same time, oddly. And this works really well in aggressive decks. Uploading as a cost on paper looks really bad, but in play it feels very smooth and it doesn't feel punishing at all. It doesn't feel as punishing as either the Ristic cost or the self-discard. So I think that can actually work really well for fixing aggressive decks. Another thing about lands is if you look at the format right now, we have very few allied land cycles. We have the Janata lands, but only because it's a super cycle, and we have the CC18 lands, which are just check lands. And that's it. Enemy, we have the Rakoa duels, and that's it. And the Janata land. So, you know, both sides need something. The thing is, since these are fetches, they also help find the Rakoa duels or the Heirloom duels. So these are actually also good for enemy as well. So these are really good for fixing. They're really good with landfall triggers, which there's one in Rakoa on a pushed blue evasive creature. And there's an interesting combo with the fetch lands and a few cards within Netropolis, namely Supercomputer and Redistricting in different ways. So the lands fit really well within Netropolis, and I think they fit really well within the format as a whole. Let's talk about aggro. So aggro right now, the best aggro deck in the format is white, splashing blue usually, is Gataxian's great deck that he built. The blue gives Crossing the Fog and the Gate, which really fills in any holes that the white deck has, and the white deck is really good at protecting itself while also being aggressive and being resilient against other aggro decks. There's going to be a couple tweaks to the cards in that deck to kind of open things up, and also, you know, the mana fixing is going to get a little better, so some other decks, maybe 2-color aggro decks, are going to become more viable. But Netropolis in particular introduces a lot of aggressive cards, particularly after rotation where we got so many mid-range tools, particularly all the green and spirit and value creatures from Araloo. And I think this would be a nice swing. And a lot of the aggressive tools aren't in white and red, the more traditionally aggressive colors, but blue, black, and green all have some really interesting ones. But one main aggressive theme is artifacts, or not artifacts, vehicles. Atari's Amplifier is a 3-mana 5/5, which you can kind of build your own Heroic Crusader if you have a lifelink creature or some other things. This is kind of a fun, aggressive tool to build the rest of your deck with, to kind of find keywords that can make this into something backbreaking. So it doesn't come with its own lifelink. You have to have lifelink from another source. So I think this will be very strong, but it will feel a lot more fair than I think Crusader did, because you have to crew it with things that will actually give it the ability. Back in action encourages more trading in aggro decks, and has some pretty strong value, I think. When you arm it, you get another artifact trigger if you're in an artifact fall deck, which is one of the themes I'll get to later. These kinds of effects, even when they're, you know, they're really good or costed really aggressively like this is, a lot of times they still don't see play just because in some matchups it's not as obvious that it's going to happen. I think this is in a good spot though. Enforce Captain is one that I'm not sure is going to get there, but it does combo with Bogborn Charger in an interesting way. You kind of build your own Revolutionary Herald, where it comes in with haste, it creates tokens, and it gives an anthem to everybody if you have Supremacy. And then it comes back to your hand, and you can rinse and repeat. So that's something to note. Just a Savannah Lions here that is good with equipment. The blue aggro offerings, Mask Maven is more of a synergy-based one on if you have an evasive tempo style deck, particularly with rogues. And when I was doing some experimental deck building for a Netropolis rotation custard, there was a really cool blue-black rogue deck with a lot of rogues where it focused on resource denial and tempo swings and getting card advantage through discarding their cards or drawing cards with Mask Maven. This is a pretty push tempo creature that I think could see good play. Moderator's Discretion is a great tempo card. You can force spike them, or if you just need the turn to, return their wipe to their hand instead of being able to cast it. Sign Mimic is kind of a gimmicky Johnny card, except I think it's actually good in a vehicles deck if you're doing like blue-black or blue-white vehicle aggro. This can copy your Atari's Amplifier for cheaper with a cheaper crew cost, or your Phantom Walker. So this actually is a really good second vehicle in vehicles decks, and yeah. So Corporate Confidant is a really push black creature that makes a Supremacy matter a lot early on in the game, and it kind of, if you're ahead on life, it kind of drains your life as you do so. This works very interestingly with and against Lazar's Altar, which some people argue is seeing too much play. I think this would play well with it if, Altar still has a place in the meta that people say that it does. I don't think it's as good as people say it is, but this does play interestingly with it. And it also crews vehicles really well with the 3 power. But still, very susceptible to removal. And, it kind of fixes itself. So if, you're drawing too many cards, you're also losing life, and that might have you lose a Supremacy bonus. Ghost in the Machine, I think, is more of a sideboard card, although, evasive 3/1 for 3 power is sometimes good depending on the meta. But the fact that it's pretty resilient, you can come back, you can bring it back is good. Phantom Walker is a very powerful, aggressive card. The crew 3 is pretty steep for what it does, but if you're trading creatures in an aggressive deck, like a black aggressive deck, this becomes very good when you're just exiling your cards to feed it. And as I mentioned, if you mix it with the blue vehicle Cyan Mimic, then it becomes pretty sweet. Sick Nick is my favorite walker. It's a good aggressive walker in that if you need to make sure they don't have a wipe, you can use it as hand disruption immediately. But you can also use it if you need to dig for more threats or a specific answer to a blocker they have, and at the same time potentially deal damage to them. There's risk in that, which is appropriate for a 2-mana walker, I think, that you might help them find the answer they need to deal with your board, but it's -2 if you are able on the next turn to use it, can then pick that card out of their hand if you're worried about them using it later. So it's a neat little package. It's heavy color weight, and I think this is something that helps enable a black-based aggro deck, in addition to Phantom Walker and Corporate Confidant. And there's just a ton of really great one-drop black aggressive creatures that aren't seeing play right now in Custard, and I think these cards help make that deck possible. And there's one other black aggressive card that I didn't put in my primer for whatever reason, probably because it cost 4 mana at the time, and I just recently buffed it to 3 mana. This is an interesting finisher, particularly in an aggressive deck, because it has evasion and a lot of power, but you're sacrificing any tempo from your hand at that point. You have to pay a lot of mana to then be casting spells afterwards, and it feels very demon-like, but also very aggressive and scary if it's on the other side of the board. So I think that's a great tool for aggro as well. Andrew Vaughn is not really traditional red aggro 4-drop. He doesn't have haste. He doesn't give an immediate bonus to your whole team, except he kind of does. Whenever an attacking creature dies, it deals 1 damage to a player. And it also forces them to attack with one of their blockers on the following turn. And since he has first strike, there's a good chance he can just kill it as it attacks back. I'm not certain that this sees play, but it's an interesting tool that I wouldn't be surprised if it did see some play. It's a little bit slower, it costs 4, and I don't know if it's the best finisher, but it's a potential one. Blitz Suit is certainly a lot more aggressive. This red vehicle mixes really well with Rotting Hellhound if you want to do a wide deck, and I think if there's a red-white wide deck that combines effects like this and Rotting Hellhound and Orcish Marauder with the Germinate cards that white offers and all of its token makers, I think that could be an interesting deck. This provides a lot of kick to those kinds of decks. Deadeye Shinobi is kind of a mid-rangey card. It's more synergy focused on artifacts, but if you're using some of the artifact tools from Netropolis in your aggro deck, this can oftentimes just be, sacrifice a weapon token to lightning bolt something, which is good. Hunter Seeker is probably the strongest aggro card to come out of Netropolis. It's a 2/1 menace for 2, which is, almost there in a lot of cases. But the fact that it arms itself anytime it deals damage in a Slith-like effect means it can get really big and end the game all on its own. You end up having a lot of arm tokens, and then if it dies, you can spread those out among your other creatures. Something that Simon has said a lot is Alter is only good against decks that don't have ways to spend lots of mana. And Hunter Seeker kind of gives that tool to aggro decks to have something to spend their mana on. If their creatures die and they've been getting lots of petals because of their opponent's Alter, not only are they happy that their opponent's been pinging themselves for those cards, but also they have mana they can use to build up whatever 1 or 2 drop they play from the top of their deck into suddenly it's a Craw Worm or something. So that's a good tool. Mecha Dragon, I'm not sure it gets there now. It costs 5. I don't know if aggro decks want to go that high. Maybe it's more of a mid-range card. Again, synergy with sacrificing artifacts. But it can get really big and really stupid and really fast, depending on what you already have on your board. Shock, just a great staple to have. It's good for aggro decks. It's really good in burn right now. Having another 1 mana proactive burn spell that you can pair with Kalameet's Gaze makes a big difference, because right now there's only Pillar of Flame. Being able to have Pillar and Shock means that you have more explosive early turns with Kalameet's Gaze. In addition to just having a proactive good spell in red to pair with Minister of Zealots, I think is what it's called. Yeah, this is a card that you want to be casting instant and sorcery spells as cheaply as possible to keep your clerics. And again, there's not a lot of those in red necessarily, and I think that fills that hole nicely, and is also a good reactive spell. Street Hacker is the 1-drop. A lot of people, not a lot, some people have said that they're concerned that the upload cost when you cast it makes this way too expensive. Again, it's not nearly as bad as discarding card or paying the ristic cost. It feels better than both, and um, just the tempo is really great. And when you do lose tempo from having to put that card back in your hand, just say you need a land drop or you're just out of gas in your hand, you have to get your uploaded card back into your hand, it still gets a bonus then to give some evasion for your street hacker and other creatures that you might have with it. This has actually played very powerfully in the testing I've done, and I think it's a fun. I think it's one of my funner upload designs. Green aggro is mostly on these Supremacy cards like Machine Oracle, which is alternately a mana dork or, just a 2/1 for 1, which has been interesting. I think cards like this and a few of the other green Supremacy cards open up green to more of an aggro bent as opposed to the value bent that it has recently. To be clear, I think there's already a lot of cards that support that in Custard. I think that these are just more of that and will help encourage that to happen more. So Machine Oracle is a good aggressive card. Once it gets in once, then maybe it can help you ramp into your 3 or 4 drop aggressive cards like Sapien Sergeant, which is kind of a mid-range card, but I think can also top end a green aggro deck. Sewer Skinner is difficult to block once you've achieved Supremacy. Really, the stronger green aggro bent, I think, is in the Boggle side. I really like Boggles, obviously. Enforce Ranger is effectively a Boggle. You're able to get in one attack as long as you play this early on, right? If you draw it later, it doesn't natively have hexproof if you're behind, and you have to catch up somehow before it can achieve hexproof. And then you combine that with with a multicolor aura in Stirring Pride, and those two tools really push Boggles over the top into being a strong contender of a deck, in my opinion. And I think that's something you can look forward to. That lovers of Boggles can look forward to, but it still plays very fair because we only have the one situational Boggle. So it's still kind of an inconsistent deck, but it has the tools it needs to be competitive when it finds that consistency. Mercenary Autopilot is good for black-white vehicles deck, and it has lifelink that you can use to give to your larger vehicles. Okay, so that's just an overview of the aggro tools. Again, blue has some tempo and rogue-based aggro stuff. Black has a lot of good aggro tools. Green has the Boggles focus, but also the Supremacy focus on Sewer Skinner and Machine Oracle and Sapien Sergeant to help out its aggro. So let's look at the staples that it offers. We have an O-ring effect with Taken for Questioning. It has a bit of color weight to it, which I think is appropriate. And yeah, it works with there's incentive to keep fighting over Supremacy, because if they do remove your Taken for Questioning but you still have Supremacy, they don't actually get their card back, which is why this is a rare and has a little bit of color weight to it. But that's a good staple to have in the format. There isn't really there's no 3-cost O-ring right now, so that's a good thing to have. Ancestral Research and Data Dig are kind of mid-game card advantage tools that I think the format's lacking right now. Ancestral Research is a lot slower. Data Dig is on my watch list for possibly being too strong, but it's something I kind of want to push because we don't really have something like it right now, like a Think Twice or something akin to that. And then Shunt Access is a 3-mana counterspell bonus if you have an artifact. And it's not a huge bonus, but it can get there. Online Tutor is a staple in that it's a tutor, but the fact that it only costs 2 and then you upload the card is really good because it helps you start tutoring for things earlier in the game, which works especially well with combo-based decks like Isemerge. If you play this on turn 2, you can almost guarantee that you can go off on your combo on turn 4. You spend turn 3 to put the uploaded card back into your hand, and you can possibly even ditch it if you're trying to find a target. and then on turn 4 cast Reemergence. And if you're missing Reemergence or the target or a discard outlet, you can find one of those 3 with this card. And usually you're just missing 1 with the way that deck is built. And so that, I think, will add a lot of consistency to the deck that it's been missing. Out of date, 2 mana black removal spell. It doesn't hit vehicles, which I think will diversify the aggro offerings a bit. And it doesn't hit equipped creatures, which is going to be less of a concern, except for, this provides incentive for players to spread their equipment around if they have it in their deck so that they can't get hit with out of date. Outside of those scenarios, this is an excellent 2 mana black removal spell that I think black based control decks have really lacked, and that they really need. Other staple, Sicknick is also kind of a discard staple. Info Dump, we have some black based card advantage cards in Custard, but not any really great ones. Info Dump has some graveyard synergies. You get card selection, you get the 2 cards, you pay some life for it, as you're wont to do with black card advantage usually. This works well with Ismerge as well if you're trying to bin something while also digging for a reemergence. And I already talked about Shock as a staple. Just having more instant speed burn is good. Machine Oracle is not really a staple because it's not a reliable mana dork. So I don't think we can consider it like that. Redistricting is kind of the more reliable ramp of the set, and it has some interesting combos with all of the you may play unlimited number of lands this turn effects that we have in Custard. If you can crack this and one of the unlimited lands per turn effects, and you have a fetch land, you can just keep replaying and using your fetch land over and over and over again until you find all the lands that it can fetch in your deck, put them into play, and you can keep failing to find for infinite landfall triggers. There's not a lot of ways to take advantage of that in the set right now, or in Custard right now. There's the blue flyer that gets +1/+1 counters anytime you play a land, and there is in this set, I don't think it's in here, but it's a Supremacy enchantment that you gain a life anytime you play a land. So that's something to be aware of. Outside of that combo, which requires many pieces, it isn't super reliable, but it's kind of a fun thing to do in a landfall deck with fetches and those cards. This just works well for ramping with fetches generally, and gives you a bit of card advantage. I just think it's a satisfying graveyard-based ramp spell. And if Netropolis gets in, one of the decks I'm going to try and build is look at all the graveyard tools of the other sets, pair it with things like Redistricting and Info Dump and Digital Witness, and see if I can make a graveyard deck, because I always like those decks. Other staples, Short Circuit is a good staple if you're playing like a Tiggle-based deck. Being able to recast a Short Circuit, deal 2 damage to something, and get an uploaded card is pretty good. It's not quite Electrify the Soul, but it's close enough that it might be worth it. It is a bit slow to get the extra value out, so you need time, which is why I think it's more likely to be in a control-based deck. Like, I don't think it fits into Crossing the Fog. Yeah, those are Underworld Deeds. I think is possibly a staple card. It's just a good, strong 2-for-1. Like one of the better kinds of 2-for-1s where you're removing something from the board and getting a specific card from your graveyard. Those are usually the best kinds of ways to get a card's worth out of a card, in my opinion. So it makes it worth fighting over Supremacy and maybe more of a mid-range Supremacy-based deck. And then these aren't really staples so much. Okay, looking at control tools, we've gone over some of the staples already that control is likely to use. Into the Mainframe is a pretty good 4-mana wipe. It does clear the board, except one of their creatures merely gets uploaded. I think that's still a really great tempo hit. So I could see this being a new sweeper of choice if you're white and you're in a control deck. L3T is just good at giving you lots of life, and depending on what they have on their board, you can immediately slam this down and make them sacrifice, their Voltroned creature, if they're doing Boggles, or their Planeswalker that's an issue. Well, if they have multiple planeswalkers, I guess. Otherwise, you'd be just trading the equalizer for their planeswalker. But this is just, it has some nice flexibility with the -2, and it encourages you to sculpt the board in certain ways. And it can really slow down the game if you're against aggro, just giving lots of life and saying, do you want to attack my 6 loyalty planeswalker, or do you just want to race the 3 life a turn? We're looking at control, taken for questioning. Data dig and ancestral research, potential control cards. Backdoor, maybe. I don't know. That's kind of a niche use. That's probably more of an ECH card. Corporate Ascension is a very slow upload win condition. If once you have this in play, you get to upload at the beginning of your turns. And if you're willing to pay 2 a turn, that means a card, but that's still paying 2 a turn, which might be too slow for this custard environment. However, if the meta slows down enough, this might become a good control card. I don't think it really is, but if somebody wants to make an upload-based control deck, they do have this tool, and they can throw all of the upload cards in there and steal some wins here and there. Once you download 10 times, you win the game. That's the point of that card there. Full automation is, that's more artifact synergy than it is a control effect. Talia doesn't really control anything, but she is a ramp tool and a card advantage tool. If if you're playing Elvish Visionaries and things like that, you can bounce them back to your hand and get a ton of cards, or just ramp at other times. So this is more of a blue-based ramp tool than it is control. Deep Net, this is definitely one to watch just because its ceiling is pretty high, but all the times I've tried to abuse it, it's become very difficult. You need to be very solidly in black and have ways to, you have to have lots of life and something to do with the cards, mana to both get the cards and to play them. But it's something to look at. That might be in some kind of combo or controlling deck. Out of date. Self-Destruct Sequence. The fact that this is an enchantment, and you can, once it pops, you can then be the first one to play a creature to stabilize the board is really nice. However, you are telegraphing what's coming. But it does give you a way to respond to the board on turn 4. You just have to eat everything they're going to throw at your face during that next turn. This is interesting because it's an enchantment. There's an interesting enchantment Sultai deck that I've been messing around with if Netropolis rotates in that mixes with Zulev Rites from Heirloom, where you can find any enchantment in your deck for just 1 green mana and play it that turn. If you mix that with the blue enchantment that gives everything flash, you can play Self-Destruct Sequence at instant speed at the end of their turn and then wipe all their stuff. So that's kind of a fun thing. And it, you can have things like redistricting or some other toolbox enchantments in a deck like that. So I'm glad that this wasn't intended to fit into some kind of enchantments deck, but the fact it works well with Zulev Rites and the give everything flash enchantment is kind of cool and makes for an interesting deck. I don't think Sicknick is a control card, although it can give you some card advantage over time. Aggressive Demining. This is more of a sideboard against if they have lots of tokens. It's in this set to deal with boards that are full of arm tokens, but this also can work well against petals if they have a ton of petals over on their side of the board. And, just kind of wipe things. So that's kind of the red control offering, aside from shock. Intelligent Design, it's not really control, but it's a big green card advantage spell where you can upload a lot of stuff and put a creature into play. And then we talked about Short Circuit and Underworld Deeds. Okay, now let's look at sideboard offerings, because that's always an important thing to look at. Wait, did I miss anything with artifacts for control? These are a little bit more build-around cards. Oh, I guess Oversight Droid might go in a construct-based aggro deck, black and red. I guess I'll get back to that later when I talk about themes. But let's talk about Sideboard Tools. So we have the wipe, Sonic Scream, instant speed artifact or enchantment removal. That can get rid of things like Taken for Questioning, Supercomputer, just a good thing to have, particularly in an environment. Oh, and all playable vehicles as well. So this is a good sideboard tool for the format to have if Netropolis gets in. Blue doesn't really have specific sideboard tools. Misclick. If upload decks, there's like 2, maybe potentially 3 upload decks. None of them I don't think get past tier 2. But if any of them does, the format at least has Misclick, which can also double as Graveyard Hate. So yeah, just a good sideboard card against graveyard-based stuff or upload combo or upload value decks. And aggressive demining I already talked about as potential sideboard sweeper against token-based stuff. And then Hart Crash. This was designed for destroying indestructible artifacts. Like, it really destroys this artifact, like a super shatter. But it can also combo to deal with Thorlund Healer and other effects that grant indestructible to a board. And then as a red player, like, well, what am I supposed to do against an indestructible board? You don't really want to combo Hard Crash into a separate sweeper. Like, when you sweep, you want to get card advantage from it, not burn a lot of cards just to get rid of a small board. But it is a potential thing. It also can deal with the big affinity indestructible white creature, which I'll get into later. But that's a tool that the format has. If indestructible artifacts or just really good artifacts become too good. And then green has Arcologize, which is enchantment or artifact removal. I guess you can do silly things by putting it on an arm token that suddenly becomes ramp for you. If you really want to do that. It's planeswalker removal as well. So this is potentially a pretty good sideboard card. Creeping Corrosion. This is the safety valve for if artifacts are just totally out of control. And then other sideboard stuff in here. I don't think there's any particular sideboard cards in here. Okay. Now themes. So there's 4 themes that are kind of internal to Netropolis. I think there's a lot of cards that help a lot of other themes that are in Custard right now. I've talked about vehicles a little bit. I think that adds a different dimension with a little more setup and more synergy and heavier swings back and forth to aggro. I want to talk about artifacts. There's really only 2 artifact-based decks that I think would see constructed play. And one is Artifact Fall, and it's blue-white. It uses blue-white flyers, specifically Skyguard Ascendant and Skyguard Sovereign. And you mix them with other artifact creatures or arm effects to give all your flyers, +1/+1 multiple times and really get in there. You can have these free artifacts just for free triggers like Data Petal or the one from Heirloom. And then you can have your white indestructible guy as kind of a top end Dominator Droid. And you also have Flutter Droid as a good 1-drop, and then a few other limited cards that become good in this deck just because they're flying artifact creatures, or things like Back in Action, where you can then return those creatures and get your arm trigger, get multiple artifact fall triggers, all at instant speed. So I've played a few iterations of that and played against a few iterations, and it's pretty good, but I don't think it's super strong. I don't think it gets past tier 2. It's not as good as the best aggro decks right now, in my opinion. It might, with tuning, it might get better. As other artifacts are printed, it might get better, but right now it's not a deck I'm worried about. It gets kind of interesting if you open it up to banned colors, and then it gets more inconsistent because of the mana base. But if you have Nano Birther in there, and then you're casting these artifact creatures, you're doubling your artifact fall triggers every time, because you also get this artifact token along with that creature. And similarly, we have Liberated Armory, which does something similar, where every time a creature enters play, whoa, you get the arm trigger, so another artifact trigger. So it can get out of control, right, if the pieces come together, but it's a little too synergy focused, and it's not the kind of affinity or artifact deck where you're dropping the cost of all your artifacts and just emptying your hand. It's not that kind of traditional affinity style deck. It's more just kind of synergy focused. Are you playing the right cards? Are you getting, are you sequencing your triggers in the correct way? It's still a fun deck, and there's a bunch of different ways you can build it. There's a lot of constructs in it, so you maybe throw in an oversight droid for making your team a little buffer, although that doesn't buff up your nanobots. Yeah, so that seems to be the strongest artifact-based deck. There's some tools that might work in a slower artifact-based deck, particularly. I mentioned Dominator Droid, which maybe you start casting for cheap if you have some value-based artifacts, or just some cheap ones. And the fact it's a big indestructible guy is very appealing. And you kind of want to build a deck to cheat, right? I found it's very difficult to do that and still have a great deck. Also, we have a lot of removal like Wander the Unknown or Banish that make this indestructible keyword not really matter so much, especially since those are already two of the best removal spells in the format, so players don't really have to go out of their way to deal with indestructible or Taken for questioning or things like that. Full Automation is kind of a spicy mythic that if you have a bunch of big artifacts in your deck, you can find them and play them for free with Full Automation and get some card advantage at the same time. So that might be a thing. Problem is there's not a lot of really great big artifacts in Netropolis or outside of Netropolis. It might become a deck later as more sets rotate in. The Network is the other big artifact creature that might be worth cheating in. It's more of an ECH synergy thing where you're kind of building a janky deck that cares about activated abilities of your artifacts and creating weird engines where all of your arm tokens and nanobots have Soylent Station, and then you play Elvish Visionaries and then immediately sacrifice them for mana and then draw more Elvish Visionaries and just go through your whole deck that way or something stupid. That is I don't think that's a competitive deck necessarily, but it's kind of a fun one. I want to see what people come up with. When Xeris was kind of messing around with it, he realized there's just really not a lot of activated abilities in Custard right now for whatever reason. Okay, so that was two of the three artifact decks. The third one is kind of this sacrifice-based deck that's more aggressive, cares more about sacrificing artifacts and gaining value out of your own artifacts as you sacrifice them. So Toxic Scrap Heap is kind of the best card for this strategy, where you can shock something and then sacrifice it to make them discard a card, which is pretty good in combination with the Shinobi, Deadeye Shinobi, where you can, deal 3 damage to something. That's just a lot of value out of a 3-drop, and it's just a nice curve from 2 to 3. And then you also have the dragon, and you have where's that construct? Oversight Droid, and there's just a lot of constructs in the deck that can kind of come together with Construct Tribal mixed with the sacrificing artifacts for value. But that's, again, more of a synergy focus that I don't think has the raw power to deal with. I don't think it gets past the raw power of the decks that are already good right now. Blackwatch Ace is a card I neglected to mention when talking about vehicles, as a black 1-drop specifically for a vehicles deck. Okay, so that was the third artifact deck, and that's really all the artifact synergies. So if you're worried about like the Kaladesh or Mirrodin issue with, artifact sets usually break something and ruin a format, I really don't think that's going to happen with this set. I've kind of tested the extremes there. Supercomputer is an artifact, and this is the artifact that's closest to being broken in my opinion, but because it works well with your fetch lands, right? But it's just so slow. I'm not sure that it gets to any point of being too good. It becomes a really cool toolbox card, and it's definitely a deck I want to try making. if Netropolis rotates in, to see if there's a toolbox deck that uses supercomputer and fetch lands and um, tutoring effects to just get lots of card advantage and have the right thing at all times. Okay, the other mechanic that has some internal synergy is upload. I used to have a lot more cards that cared about uploaded cards, and it was kind of difficult to evaluate what upload was doing in the set because of this. But now there's really just like 3 cards. There's Corporate Ascension that I talked about. You win the game once you've downloaded 10 times. It's very slow. It's not likely to be a real pressure on the format. Doxing, which is more of a limited build around enchantment, but you could build an aggressive deck with doxing and upload effects, just because, you know, the repeatable shocks can get there. That's pretty good. Mixed with Street Hacker, that it also gets unblockable triggers, or, you know, target creature can't block as you're downloading. So being able to shock something and make something else not block and get in with your Street Hacker is pretty good synergy with upload. But that's the whole package, really, as far as the upload synergies. And then the last thing is this upload combo deck with respec that requires you to have a big uploaded creature, so you have to have uploaded something worth reanimating, and a creature in play, and then you also need respec for them to swap places. There's things like Street Hacker and Coruscating Cityscape that can have you upload from hand, so to give you a little more control and making sure you have your reanimation target in play. When I tried to build a streamlined deck of this and that was just focused on being as consistent as possible, no interaction, it's like way less consistent than Is-Emerge. So I don't think it's going to be a problem, but it is a fun thing to try and build. I'd be interested to see a more tuned version, but I suspect it's not going to be an issue. Yeah. And then Short Circuit. You know, most of the upload cards are just staples that use the upload mechanic in interesting ways. Well, I mean, a lot of times it's just card advantage, but some of the black cards that upload from your opponent are pretty interesting, in my opinion. Are we missing? Mask Prowler or Mask Hacker? I forget the name of it, but there's a blue-black tempo creature that's really good with upload that isn't in my primer for some reason. That's weird. It's a rogue, too. Anyway, yeah, so that's artifacts and upload. Supremacy is the last one that I wanted to talk about. I kind of showed off the Boggle Supremacy cards and then the green, more aggressive-based Supremacy cards. They just kind of get a little better at being aggressive once you've achieved Supremacy, so really encouraging players to get in there. Machine Oracle, you know, becomes interesting later in the game. It can ramp if it can't attack anymore, as long as it's dealt enough damage earlier in the game. The only Supremacy black cards worth mentioning are Corporate Confidant, which has a really fun mini game early on, and yeah, I think that's it. There's a black removal spell that's more for limited, but if you have Supremacy, it costs 1 and a black for a -4/-4, which, you know, I could see that maybe being useful in some matchups or situations. The hacker I was talking about, by the way, was Mask Saboteur. It kind of mixes with, if you're uploading a bunch of their cards, then they have to pay lots of mana to get their cards back, but they have to keep an untapped land, otherwise your creature is unblockable, and then when it deals damage to them, you upload more cards from their hand. So it really focuses on that aggressive, disruptive play loop. So, yeah, if you guys have any questions about any of the cards or design decisions or concerns, hit me up in the Discord. This is just me reintroducing the set for those who, you know, it's been a while since you've looked at it, or you've seen it so many times you're just not sure what the state of the set is right now for this rotation. I think it'll be really good for custom standard this rotation or any other upcoming rotation that it gets in. I think now would be a good time, just because, you know, I want to get it in as soon as possible so I can, you know, move on mentally onto other projects. But I also think the constructed offerings have been in a good spot for a while now. They're pretty well cemented and well tested, pretty stable. And also with the new format for custom standard, the way that things are rotating, this set would be in for 5 rotations. The next one would be in for 6. And I'm sympathetic to the idea that science fiction based sets shouldn't be in custard as long as other sets, maybe. Or sets that have a lot of artifacts, maybe it's more interesting if they're not in as long as a bunch of other sets, so that, you know, if artifact synergies across multiple sets get a little crazy, at least it's not going to be in for as long. Or if you're really concerned about Artorias with a gun, it'll be less if it's voted in now as opposed to in the next couple of rotations. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys around playing Custom Standard.